Howdy, and welcome to the BattleGround to Breaking Ground and Texas AgrAbility webinar series, Strategic Winter Supplementation Programs. My name is Mackenzie Thomas, and I'm the Program Coordinator for Texas AgrAbility. This webinar is hosted by Texas AgrAbility and BattleGround to Breaking Ground, and it's a grant-funded partnership between Texas A&M AgriLife Extension and USDA's National Institute of Food and Agriculture. We serve active duty military veterans, beginning farmers and ranchers, and individuals with disabilities, chronic health conditions, and functional limitations in agriculture. And the ways we do this is through providing education and support. We offer online and in-person training through farm and ranch business planning, management, and agriculture production, as well as hands-on learning workshops. We also offer disability support services through Texas AgrAbility related to case management, farm and ranch assessments, equipment recommendations, and resource connections and referrals. In response to military veterans and beginning farmers and ranchers' needs for business plans, ag production education, and hands-on experience, we developed the three-phase BattleGround to Breaking Ground program. Phase one is a one-day ag workshop where we cover rural business ideas, some business planning basics, resources for veterans and beginning farmers and ranchers, and some funding resources. And then individuals can apply or pay a tuition to enter the phase 2 and 3 program. Phase 2 is online education. It's 16 weeks of business planning courses where you get an individual education plan. It comes along with a community of practice, so you go through the program with your peers. And in the end, you will have a developed comprehensive business and basically farm management plan. Those applications come available in summer and winter, and the programs usually start in August and January each year. Phase 3 is the production education portion. So that partners individuals with mentors, and they receive hands-on training, 100 hours in ag production, and then there's also online production agriculture courses in whichever field they're interested in going into. And once you complete that program, you get a certificate which helps individuals access some funding opportunities available through USDA. We also do other webinars about once per month. So we archive those on our Texas AgrAbility YouTube channel. Some of the ones we've done recently are tax considerations for farms and ranches with Jason Morgan of Leatherneck Financial Services, covering tax information, filing, deductions, those kind of things. How to start a farm business with Doug Haveman of Mesquiteville Farm, selling at farmers markets, a marketing webinar with Mesquiteville Farm, and one of the more popular ones was the Texas Department of Agriculture's Young Farmer Grant applicant webinar. And you can view all of those on our Texas AgrAbility YouTube channel. Here are some ways you can connect with us through social media. We have an email newsletter that we share all of our upcoming events, webinars, helpful information through that you can subscribe to, as well as our events calendar. If you ever need to get in touch with us, you can either visit our website and find our contact information there, or just email us through txagrability@gmail.com. Links to these will also be listed in the description box of this video. So we have a short survey to gauge your knowledge before the webinar. Please open on the link provided in the description box below this video in a new tab. You can pause the video, take the pre-service questions. The pre-service questions will be on the first page of this survey. So you'll take I think it's 8 questions, and then there's some arrows at the bottom. Click those, but leave your browser open because there will be some post-survey questions that you can take at the end of the webinar. So if you could pause the video now and go ahead and take those pre-survey questions. All right, so now we will get into the webinar with Dr. Travis Whitney. So this, like we said earlier, this is the Strategic Winter Supplementation Programs webinar, and joining us today we have Dr. Travis Whitney. He's an assistant professor in livestock nutrition at the Texas A&M AgriLife Research Center there in San Angelo. He has a PhD in beef cattle nutrition from the University of Arizona and joined Texas A&M AgriLife Research in 2005, where he's currently an associate professor and project leader of the AgriLife Livestock Nutrition Research Program. His applied research program focuses on designing innovative, low-cost, non-human edible feed ingredients and feeding strategies for livestock and wildlife, which can enhance growth efficiency, health, and end product quality. He has published 36 peer-reviewed journal articles, a book chapter, and 120 other publications, along with delivering 92 oral presentations. He's a member of multiple professional organizations and has trained numerous students, industry, and government representatives and visiting scientists. He's also served on multiple editorial review boards and is a reviewer for multiple journals and granting agencies. And Dr. Whitney has been a great partner and proponent of our programs here with AgrAbility and BattleGround to Breaking Ground. So we're really glad to have him today. We will also be doing a BattleGround to Breaking Ground workshop there in San Angelo in, I believe it's April 25th. So if you're interested in attending one of those workshops, we will have registration links for those on our calendar within the next couple of weeks. So with that, I will try to turn it over to Dr. Whitney and he can share his presentation.
All right, thank you. So I'm trying to share the screen, but it's saying, I think you have to stop sharing yours first.
Did that work for you?
I think so. Can you see?
I can see your screen now.
Okay, let me get going. So yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to be here. And like she said, it's been a pleasure to work with this group. It's an incredible opportunity for not only beginning ranchers, but military and those other groups. So excited to be here. So the hardest thing about this, a lot of times, is knowing exactly what the education level for livestock production is. We're going to go through some things, and at any time, feel free to stop and ask questions. There's going to be a lot of numbers that you'll probably have to go back and play with later if you're interested. But what I like to do when I give presentations to ranchers is, and Eric, yeah, Mackenzie, you can hear me, correct?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Is to kind of give them an overview, but then actually say, okay, what's the next step? And implementation is the largest part. We can listen to a lot of presentations, but unless you know exactly what to do in the next step. So we're going to go over some of that also. And I'm glad it's going to be recorded. That way you can go back and kind of do some, it's just basic math. Going to help you all decide what type of supplements to purchase and what is the actual cost of those supplements. It's not just the tag price. So the ideal situation, I think you need to start with the benchmark. So the ideal situation for range supplementation is just not to supplement. So we tell our ranchers, and we'll talk about it in this presentation, that you have to have good rangelands. And if you have good rangelands, you know, we do have ranchers that do not supplement except in extreme drought or maybe during the winter to early lactating animals. So It rarely happens. We do have to supplement at times. Ideally is that you would have the labor to help. In today's world, labor is getting to be more and more difficult, and you wouldn't have to supplement every day. So research has shown that you could get away with supplementing a week's worth of feed once a week. Also is that you'd have enough money for labor if it was available. And also, there's challenges too about supplementing to an average group. So ideally, all your livestock would be the similar age and in the similar stage of production, which is never the case. No non-target species consumption. So when you're supplementing, yes, ma'am?
Sorry. I think we're seeing the side of your screen that doesn't have your presentation pulled up.
Let's see what I do.
Does it allow you to switch the screen that you're sharing?
Yeah, let me try.
Or just drag the presentation. We are just seeing a blue screen with the windows.
Okay. Is that better?
I'm still only seeing the blue screen. Can someone else chime in? Are they seeing his presentation? Someone else said they can only see the blue.
Okay. Let me. Okay, I can fix that now.
Okay.
1 second.
Okay. There we go.
All right, now it should be in the presentation format. All right, sorry about that.
Thank you.
I have 3 screens up and picked the wrong one.
Thank you.
So,
Sorry about that.
All right, great. So, when we're out supplementing livestock, you have to, understand that there's other non-target species that are consuming your supplement. For instance, one large problem, as you know, in Texas is hogs, and we are designing some supplements that the hogs won't eat, because we have to stop feeding the hogs. But if you feed 50 pounds of supplement and hogs and turkey come in and clean up half of it, then it basically doubles your supplementation costs. So ideally, nothing else would eat it except for the targeted species, the targeted animal. And ideally, a lot of ranchers have 4 or 5 horses, and you have to take that into account. So ideally, and this is being kind of joking around, but horses won't eat any hay, won't eat any grass, because one horse for the year is going to consume close to 40 bales of hay or forage. So it's something to consider. If you do supplement, then this is where the definition of strategic supplementation comes in. And again, ideally, you deliver exactly what is needed at the exact time that it is needed, at the exact rate, to the exact animal. So these are all challenges, especially for livestock nutritionists, and especially for grazing livestock. It's a lot easier for a nutritionist to target what that animal is consuming in a dry lot. When you put that animal out in the pasture, it gets really difficult. And then again, make sure that animal is eating 100% of whatever you're formulating, because we could formulate a supplement and it looks great on paper, but the cattle maybe eat about half of the predicted intake, so you're not meeting their supplementation demands. We'll spend a lot of time in this little picture, but again, difference between accuracy and precision, and being highly accurate is different than being highly precise. So you can be precise and be off the mark. So the ultimate goal is to have a lot of accuracy, know the goals that you're trying to reach, and then precision means hit that goal every time. So we do have some ranchers that are still stuck on looking at their gross profit when they sell their calves at the end of the year, and maybe $15,000 makes the payment on the ranch. But of course, that's not what we're striving for. We have to go beyond that and actually, of course, look at your net profit. So your labor should be part of that. You shouldn't be working for free for yourself or anyone else. And of course, all the things that go into a ranching operation. But even going beyond that, is a sustainable net profit. And the reason I put this up here is because you could purchase a 1,000-acre ranch and for the first 2 years overgraze it, and your net profit would be great. But that is not sustainable. So in the second, third, going into the fourth year, where your ranch now looks like a dry lot, then you're out of business. So that's a challenge to create a sustainable operation. So before we talk about strategic livestock supplementation programs, you need to understand what's going out on the pasture, going on. So this is really for row crops type of picture, but it could be for any type of grass or forage that you have out on the pasture. So let's just say the grass is young, coming up early spring, and you put too many livestock out there and you overgraze. So this plant is going to be highly nutritious. It's going to have low cell structural carbohydrates. It's going to have good protein, but there's not much of it. So you can overconsume that and then not have anything in about a month or so. When you go to the other extreme, if you wait for that either a planted forage or the rangeland forages to head out and it's past that soft dough stage, then again you have a lot of forage, but it's really low quality, high fiber forage that's not readily used by the cattle, sheep, or goats. So in between is kind of where we want to be when we start grazing this forage. You can have some backgrounding forage that is a little bit older and goes over to that far right bloom stage to use during times of drought. Is there a question? Y'all still there? All right. So also, not only to know what those plants are doing as far as growth, but to understand in general, you know, when you go out there in the winter versus early spring with a lot of rain versus early fall, you have to understand what the crude protein, minerals, and digestibility, what's the worth, you know, the net worth of that plant. So grasses change the most over the year. And let's say this is Texas winter grass. So in the spring, it could be 8 to 10% crude protein, and then it falls going into the winter. The forbs are more relatively stable, but in the spring, you know, it's 20% crude protein, and then it automatically drops off summer, fall, if you can find any forbs at all, especially in West Texas. Those are what we call the ice cream plants. So those animals attack the forbs, whether it's deer, sheep, cattle, or goats. They'll start consuming forbs, and that's a really good crude protein source. Crude protein source for a while. Browse is also a consideration. So the browse is your woody plants, so your tree leaves basically. And believe it or not, the browse has a lot of crude protein and is highly digestible. So if you stay on the browse line there, you're looking at digestibility similar to alfalfa. So whether it's oak leaves or juniper, cedar trees, they don't really eat much mesquite. The browse can supply a crude protein source for goats, to a lesser extent sheep, and then almost to no extent cattle, unless they're eating a little bit of the oak leaves, but it's not much of their diet. But again, as you go into the winter for grass, just understand that you're losing crude protein and you're reducing digestibility. And as digestibility decreases, then that animal has to actually consume more feed in order to meet its requirements. So it's just something to be to notice, so you can supplement accordingly. So, you know, we don't expect this group to get into these books, the nutrient requirements of beef cattle and small ruminants, but these books are basically a summary of hundreds, if not thousands, of research and literature. And it gives you kind of a general idea of what the requirements are of different classes of animals. We'll go over that briefly. I don't want to show too many numbers the time that we have, but this kind of gives you a starting point to see, you know, what the nutrient requirements are, what the differences are between, say, like a sheep, a ewe that's in early lactation versus one that's dry, that's not lactating at all. So those books are available, and we use those extensively, again, to get us a foundation that we can work off of. So you get to the animal, and the first thing you need to understand is maturity and whether it's cattle, sheep, or goats. So is it a young heifer versus an 8-year-old cow? They have different nutrient requirements. As you can imagine, a 15-year-old girl versus a 70-year-old lady. So the heifers are developing body weight and frame size, so they need more dense nutrients than an old cow. And also body weight is BW and body condition. So the body weight is important, again, because the larger animals are going to require more total nutrients, but body condition is probably the most important aspect of going out and looking at cattle and seeing if they need to be supplemented, or if your range conditions are not holding up. So in general, if you look at a body condition score of, say, a 2 or 3, you can see that this last rib and her pins and hooks, you can really see the defining shape. If you get up to a body condition score of 7, this cow or heifer is really fat. So during the winter, at times in West Texas, a body condition score of 3 is acceptable. If it gets lower than that, then you can start negatively affecting reproduction and calf body weight if she has a calf on her. So it's just a good way to go out and see what the kind of the health, nutritional health of the herd is, and it's a way to pull animals out that may be wormy. If these 2 cows were in the same herd, I would definitely, and the majority of the herd was in a body condition scores of 6 and 7s, and you had 1 or 2 that body condition score of 2 or 3, like the top picture, then I would pull them out. They're wormy or something's going on with them. They're not like the rest of the animals. So I always like to tell my ranchers that just remember, in these cattle and sheep and goats, they're ruminants, and the good Lord made ruminants so they can consume grasses and convert that into meat and milk. But inside that rumen is microbial population that can break down the grass. So when we're feeding the animal, even though it's consuming the feed, just remember we're feeding those microbes and not the animal. So we feed the microbes to make energy for that animal to produce meat and milk. So we won't get into a in-depth rumen microbial type of talk. Just kind of remember that that's one reason that we can't go out and feed cattle on pasture 500 pounds of corn and walk away, because they'd probably die. So we've got to really take care of those microbes and make sure we're not hurting those. Species and breeds. So again, when we look at the nutrient requirements of animals that produce fiber, whether it's you've got your Boer goats that do not produce fiber, you have your Angoras, and you have some Ramalays and Dorpers here. So that fiber growth requires energy and protein, because the fiber is mostly pure protein. You have to keep that in consideration whenever that ewe is possibly in early lactation and she hasn't been shorn yet, so she's growing wool and she has a high nutrient demand. Time since shorn, that's basically has to do with climate and weather. So when you shear sheep and all of a sudden it gets down to 20 degrees, then she has a greater nutrient demand just to keep her body temperature up. This is kind of a complicated graph, but it's basically the stage of production, and you can generalize this over, with cattle, sheep, and goats. And no matter what the days are, you can kind of forget the months. It's looking at a cow, the stage of gestation and lactation for cattle. But the highest nutrient demands, of course, is when that cow is in early lactation, because now that cow is consuming feed and nutrients, and there's an energy requirement to convert that into milk that goes into the calf. So that's why when people start talking about early weaning, and basically you're trying to get that calf off the cow so she stops milking and can take care of her own body. So there's a lot of great programs out there where we can early wean these These calves, they at probably 3 months of age, maybe 4, and 250 to 300 pounds, get them off the cow and let her get ready for that next pregnancy. We want her to be bred once a year. So we're asking that cow to do a lot. So let's help her out and get that calf off, because those nutrient demands during early lactation are high. And during that time, a lot of times she can't consume enough feed in order to keep her body weight up. So mid-lactation, let's say that around the time you start trying to wean, she can consume enough and her body weight kind of levels out and starts coming back up during late lactation, when she's pretty much drying off, maybe about a third of the lactation that she had during early lactation. This dry period, again, if we early wean, we can get her into this dry period faster. And that dry period is basically her body just getting ready again to go all the way back through pregnancy and the same production. So it's real critical, again, to make sure you have enough forage out on the pasture, and also supplement that to make sure that she can be bred once a year. If that cow misses a year's, she didn't have a calf 1 year, you basically fed her for nothing. So we got to get the nutrients in her in the right amount. So here's another graph kind of just summarizing what we talked about. So if you have a pasture situation where it's 9% crude protein, and that's fairly good for grasses in this region of Texas. We're a little different on the west side of I-35 than the east side. The east side pretty much has all the nutrients and protein that you could ask for, but you know, if the forage quality is 9%, and that cow or heifer has been out consuming pasture, and then all of a sudden that crude protein drops down to 5 or 6, then you can tell that cow is really stressing. So during this time is when you need to supplement. And supplementation is just to deliver feed ingredient or nutrients to remedy a deficiency. So if it gets down lower than 4 or 5% crude protein, then she has a really hard time, if not impossible, to consume enough forage to keep and get her back into cycling. So I like to show this because you need, when you look at your livestock out on the pasture, you need to know what's going on inside of them. And this, again, it's, you can just, of course, larger fetuses in cows, but this is relevant to cows. They're in the first 50 days of pregnancy. You know, they're really small fetuses. They're not consuming much nutrients. Days 50 to 100, you have rapid placental growth and increased nutrient demands. And I'll show you in the next slide, the days 100 to 150, that last trimester is when you have rapid fetal growth. So you need to make sure that animal has enough nutrients in order to produce a viable fetus. And that's what we talked about in this here. I'm going to go to the next slide. So this is an interesting slide. So go back to it. So this is the cross section. If you cut a sheep in half, this is a cross section of the sheep, and this is the size of the rumen. So as you can see in the next slide, between 88 and 150 days of gestation, 88 days of gestation, the fetus is growing, right? So it's kind of displacing some of that rumen volume, but it's still not bad. But as you go down here, as you can tell, this is the fetus, and then look at the size of the rumen. So something you need to be aware of when they're in that last trimester is that there's a lot of stress on that animal, whether it's a sheep or a cow, because that fetus is pushing on the rumen. So not only are you losing rumen volume, but that animal, if it's during the winter, in the, say, January, February, about now, they're in last trimester, then it's a lot of stress for that animal. And we got to make sure, again, our rangelands are good to go. We have enough energy, biomass out there, and then we may have to supplement with crude protein during this period in order to get her ready to go into early lactation. So these next couple of slides, y'all can go back over later if you're interested. This comes out of the book, and basically what I'm just trying to show is again what we talked about, is a mature ewe that's about 200, 150, 180 to 200 pounds of body weight. Here's her maintenance requirements. So this is like during the dry period where she's not milking. And this is when she's getting ready to be bred, so during breeding. So you can tell that, again, her nutrient requirements increase. If you don't have the forage to support this, then you have to supplement. Again, even more extreme example is a late gestating ewe with twins. And you could tell her crude protein from maintenance to late gestation of being 240 grams per day. There's a huge difference there. So we got to kind of understand that when they get into early gestation or late gestation, then those nutrient requirements have to increase. I'm going to skip this slide for the sake of time, but it really gets into how we determine how much supplement is needed. And in a general sense, you know, I don't really go over this too much with my ranchers. If they can, most of them are supplementing on averages anyway, so we can go out and look it up, kind of look at their pastures and look what condition the body condition score is of the cattle. And I can make general recommendations, whether it's a pound a day, up to 4 pounds a day of supplement. But there's some calculations here if you're interested in kind of determining what that animal needs. And if you get to that point where you need help, then I'm available, and other county agents are available to help y'all do those calculations. So let's talk about money. So eventually you're going to go out and you're going to have to buy feed. So all ranchers buy feed, most of them. And, you know, one thing I always tell my ranchers is that when you're feeding hay, like in the bottom right corner, you know, that hay is not a supplement. So you need to get out of the mindset that you can go buy hay to supplement animals unless it's alfalfa hay. So that's my general recommendation. If it's less than 15% crude protein, it's a substitute. So you're actually substituting for either poor rangelands or during drought to where that animal doesn't have enough forage. So we'll talk about what you can do in that situation. The first thing you need to do is manage your rangelands better. And most of the time that means getting animals off of that property and letting your grass grow. Because as we'll talk about here in a minute, the cost of forage that's growing out in the pasture is a lot less than bringing hay into them. So we always, you know, I get, it's kind of funny when people are out selling quote unquote horse hay, and most of the time it's green, weed free. There are some benefits to what they call horse hay, but just be careful because horse hay may just mean that it was put up early. It wasn't allowed to dry out good enough. Excuse me. So it could just be green, but it doesn't have the nutrients that it looks like it should have. So you can't really look at a bale of hay other than mold, or, you know, if it's really brown or old hay, and give a quality analysis. You've got to sample like they're doing in this second picture. You've got to sample that bale of hay and get it analyzed. But let's talk about money. So if you buy a round bale for $50, let's say on average it's 1,000 pounds. So automatically it costs you $100 a ton for that bale of hay. In general, you could have 25% or more waste. So you take 100 divided by 0.75 because you're losing 25%. So now you just paid $133 per ton. So you do your math and it comes out to $0.67 per pound of crude protein. So again, you don't ever feed hay in order to supplement for crude protein. It just doesn't work. And when they're out in the pasture, let's say it's during the winter, if there's enough forage available, like I think the pre-quiz had asked, but there's enough forage available, that forage is energy. So you don't technically need to supplement with any more energy like corn. If you had the choice between energy and protein, you'd want to supplement with protein. And again, you would not supplement, you're not bringing in bales of hay across your cattle guard to supplement with protein. So again, what if the 1,000-pound bale? So if a farmer's telling you that that bale was 10% crude protein and you subsample a load of hay that comes out to be 7%, then of course it's much higher. So if I was going to buy anything more than 4 or 5 bales, I would core sample that bale and get it analyzed. It costs like $7 a sample, and I think everyone selling hay should do it. And don't forget about dry matter. So hay is sold on a as fed basis, means that it is what it is. When you go buy that bale of hay, it's $50. But if it has 20% moisture in it, as it just comes along with the forage, and 80% dry matter, then it's going to cost you even more, because we don't necessarily we don't look at the moisture content when we look at nutrients going into the animal. So if you buy wet hay, you're getting less dry matter, even though the bale of hay may cost more and way more. So here's an interesting little calculation I like to do for the ranchers, is to compare the cost of bringing hay again across your cattle guard versus just be a good range manager and produce the forage that's already out there on your property. So the general rule when you're grazing is to take half, leave half, and then only half of that is edible. So basically, if you have 1,000 pounds, or in this case, so 1,500 pounds of forage per acre, you multiply that by 0.25, and per acre, you would have 375 pounds available for that animal. If you were leasing that acre for $7.50, then technically it's $40 a ton of edible forage. So I'd much rather you pay, again, manage your property correctly, then you're only paying $40 a ton for growing forage versus that $100 to $150 a ton hay that you bring in that you don't even know the quality of. So I'll go over this scenario really quick. Back during the drought when cotton didn't make around 2012 or 13, I had a lot of ranchers call and ask about these cotton bales. So they would bale the whole entire plant because maybe it only made like 40% bolls. So they baled it up and they were selling them. And just so happened to have a cousin, and he'd been ranching a long time, and he was excited. He said he bought some cotton. So I did some math real quick while we were talking. And I said, how much did it cost you per bale? About $160 a bale. And he said he thinks they're around 1,700 pounds. And I said, how much are the cattle leaving behind? Because again, even though you put stuff in front of the cows, a lot of times, they may not eat it. So he said, I think they're sorting through it. They're eating about half of it. I said, all right, what stage of production are your cattle in? And they're in late gestation. So that threw up a lot of red flags to me, because that whole bale of cotton, I doubt it had 40% boll. And it's probably pretty low quality stuff, a real stemmy type of stuff. So my summarized response, since he was a cousin, I was pretty direct with him, but I said, 1,700 pounds, I disagree with that, but let's just say that's correct. If you go down to this next one, I just said you paid $160 for 700 pounds of whole cottonseed, because he had said that, I think it was full 40 or 50% whole cottonseed, which is a really good supplement, but not when it's wrapped up in a nasty bale. And so you do the math, and I said if the farmer was wrong and each bale only had about 400 pounds of whole cottonseed, then you just paid $800 a ton. So you got to be able to go through the math and figure out what are you actually paying that farmer. So he'd have been better off just going out and buying whole cottonseed and not had a mess when he's trying to feed these bales. Similar situation, a rancher near San Angelo, he bought the same type of bales, and his backgrounding cattle didn't eat any of it. And he had probably 100 bales on hand. So he just had a bunch of mulch. In that situation, with this rancher, I would have went and bought a tub grinder and ground that up. And then then it's probably worth what they paid for it if you mix it with other feed and put it into a supplement, but not being fed by itself. So again, kind of reiterate what we talked about is determine which side of the fence are you on. Are you in poor range conditions, or is your pasture managed correctly? And I can tell you right now, the guy over on the left with the same type of cattle same number of cattle. I mean, this guy has less cattle, and this guy probably has more cattle. This guy is making more net profit, and this guy, again, is probably making more gross profit, but it's not sustainable. So briefly on a feed bag, if you go into a feed store, then a lot of times the rancher will complain about a $425 a ton crude protein supplement that's 37%. So then he'll, if you look here, so 37% crude protein. If you look at the first ingredients, kind of like on, if you're buying human ingredients in the store, the first ingredients are the main ingredients in this mix. So plant protein products, and I can tell you most of this is probably cottonseed meal to get it up to 37%. So $425 a ton. Well, they'll look for a cheaper alternative in this 20% crude protein pellet. Now you have more grain products. That's why it's cheaper, and that's why the crude protein is less, because corn and milo is a lot less expensive than cottonseed meal. And it's $350 a ton versus the $425. So the rancher will buy this. Well, you have to feed more of it in order to get the same amount of grams of crude protein into that animal. So let's look at the math real quick on that. So he bought the cheaper supplement, and it comes out to 70 cents per pound of crude protein when you do your math. He'd have been better off, and he wouldn't have to feed as much if he would have went ahead and bought that 36% crude protein supplement for $425. So the point here is do the calculations and know exactly what you're purchasing and why. If you're purchasing it for crude protein, then you definitely want to go buy the higher crude protein feed that costs more. If there's any questions, feel free to stop me. And we'll talk about this in a little bit. More ranchers have become, I've been with A&M since 2005. Over the course of the 15 years, more and more ranchers are becoming more interested in feeding loose feed and even mixing on their own property, because I can save them between 25 and 35% on supplementation cost, especially if they mix on their own property. So we'll talk about that briefly. If you mix on your own property, then I can easily mix these up. So these are pelleted and cubed prices. I could easily mix up a $300 a ton supplement, a 36% crude protein supplement, and it costs you almost half of what this supplement is up here, a third. Again, I tell my ranchers that anytime you're feeding cubes, you're feeding a treat. So it's just like feeding your dog. If you want to feed your dog Old Roy as a basal diet, that's probably good enough. And then you go buy high dollar treats, and they need to understand that every time they feed a bag of cubes, they're just feeding treats. So it's up to them if they want to pay for convenience. They put cubes into huge bins or in the back of their truck. They push a button. They don't have to do a whole lot. So it's just something to keep into consideration. You are paying for that convenience. As I start working with more ranchers on mixing their own feed, then we really talk about dry distillers grains, and that's DDGS. And this comes either from the ethanol industry, or it comes, say, like out of Dallas from the brewer industry. But most of this is coming from the corn ethanol fuel production industry. And the unique thing about distillers versus any other ingredient is the crude protein is high. That's 30% crude protein. And the fat now is about 5%, but it does have good fat content, and it has really good energy content. And it does have fiber, but it's highly digested. So the unique benefit about distillers is that it can be used for a protein and energy source, and it can be fed by itself. So I tell people, as long as the subsidies continue on where the ethanol industry can survive and produce dry distillers grains, we definitely need to put that into our rangeland supplements. Corn and milo, or milo is also called sorghum grain. That's your energy sources, of course. and your cottonseed meal, soybean meal, canola meal, but CSM is cottonseed meal in this region of Texas. We feed a lot of cottonseed meal, high in crude protein, pretty high in undegradable intake protein, that's UIP, low in fiber, highly digested, and has good phosphorus. The other thing about distillers is the process of producing distillers. They use sulfuric acid, and so sulfur is high, and also phosphorus tends to be high. So in the feed yard, they don't want high phosphorus, but in the pasture, we want this phosphorus is actually beneficial to us, especially during the winter. I just wanted to make note of that. So this is distiller's grains here, this yellow picture. The one next to it is sorghum grain, and this is cottonseed meal, and then this is soybean meal, just so you have an idea of what they look like. So low quality refuges, there's times out in a rain situation to where you can use low quality refuges to get you through a drought. Let's say you have a really good genetic base and you don't want to sell 80% of your herd, then you can pasture them up, basically dry lot them and use some of these low quality feeds. This up here is cottonseed hulls. This is cotton gin trash, and this is just bale cotton that we saw earlier. Also, so my program in the past 12, 13 years had been researching ground woody products. We're taking entire trees of juniper, the cedar trees, and grinding those up and using those as a roughage in livestock diets. And in August 5th of this past year, I was actually in Israel when juniper got approved as a commercial feed ingredient. So that's something we were excited about, a lot of research and working with FDA. We finally got that done, but now we can grind these trees and feed it. And there's actually a 100-year history of feeding ground woody products. So we're looking to move forward in that. Urea, I really like as a rain supplement if you're careful with it. You can feed too much urea and animals will drop over dead within about 10 minutes. It's just a non-protein nitrogen source, but those rumen microbes can utilize urea to make their own protein. And of course, molasses, you can put a lot of additives, minerals, a lot of things you can do with molasses. Also candy. So I do know some ranchers that are buying old candy wrappers and all, and they go and feed it in the feed bunks, and the animals like it. It's a high energy source and just it's a pretty good supplement actually. So I think we can post later a little spreadsheet if you're interested in playing around with it. But basically there's a lot of different spreadsheets out there. It's very simple once you understand how to use it to mix your own feed. So you can work with your county agent and they can come up with a mixture for you. But basically you have a roughage source, and this is a rain supplement, say during the winter. Again, I like dry distiller's grains. Cottonseed meal gives you some protein in that supplement. This is alfalfa dehydrates, just dried, ground, hammer milled alfalfa hay. I like to add this mainly for palatability. It increases palatability of the mix and gives you a little bit of protein. Molasses keeps the dust down, and you can actually use too much molasses and that animal will have a hard time consuming it. They just don't like it if there's 8 to 10% molasses in a mixed feed. Mineral premix according to where you're at and what stage of production you're in and what your range conditions are. Again, urea 0.5% is not a problem unless that animal over consumes, but just a really basic spreadsheet that I use. And if you're interested in mixing your own feed, then I can definitely help later on. So it gets to implementation, and we're going to kind of wrap it up. But, you know, the first step eventually is to remove all your self-feeders and get rid of all your hay rings. So that's really going to force you to manage your rangelands correctly and not rely on hay, whether it's hay that you grow or whether it's hay you buy. So eventually get rid of those. And this is an old classmate of mine, Jason Manna. He's in East Texas in Overton. but, you know, we call it rednecking it, and I can say that because I'm a redneck, but, you know, he's dragging these feeders along with the four-wheeler. And the great thing about these is that you can fill these up and move them. So anyone who's supplemented livestock out on pasture knows that eventually around this thing, it's just going to become a muddy mess. So to be able to move these around the pasture is very beneficial. Look at all the opportunities you have on your ranch. If you're a cow-calf guy, what I tell some ranchers is it increases your labor, but, you know, how about reducing your cow numbers? And when you have enough available forage, go buy you some stockers. These are young cattle that come in for 60 to 200 days, and just use those when they're needed. So bring them in and then take them out after 2 or 3 months. Instead of having a large herd of cows that is pretty stable, sometimes it's good to have other classes of livestock. Base your stocking rate on winter conditions. This is really difficult, especially if you only have cows, but you really need to basically stock less. You need to stock light. Stretch your supplies, so either put in your own crops, so winter wheat or some type of cereal grain during the winter. Try to find leased land, and again, reduce numbers. And reduce your capital expenditures at all possible. Reduce your need for labor, so try to find machinery to help you versus doing it by hand. And of course, try to reduce your feed cost by mixing your own feed. If you're interested in mixing your own feed, it's pretty simple. Most farmers, ranchers have a tractor, so anywhere from a 50 to 75 horsepower tractor running a little mixer grinder. That tractor probably costs you $10,000. A little mixer grinder, a decent one, is going to cost you $5,000 to $10,000. So I always suggest going in with one or more other ranchers. And you need a little commodity barn to bring your feed ingredients in, a little tractor, and a mixer grinder, and you're good to go. So it's really not a large capital investment. So again, the commodity barn. If you're interested in, you know, here's us out harvesting juniper trees, and just a real small chipper. This thing probably costs $6,000, runs off the same tractor to run your mixer grinder, and you can chip that down. And one more step, you'll have a final product, and you can use these trees that are already growing out on your pasture. And the cost for this to harvest it, chip it, and hammer mill it for a rancher is going to be about $15 a ton. So it's pretty. Again, if you step up, there's big hay tub grinders. I would definitely have a molasses pump. There's other ways to add molasses to these mixer grinders. And put it in super sacks if you have the equipment to move these big bags around. This is just a big hopper that you can load feed into these super sacks. Mixed feed, if it's out of the weather and no rodents and insects, I would probably say a max storage of about 6 months. We already talked about the ingredients. So the take-home message is establish the goals, objectives, priorities, and do your math. So whether it's doing your bills and knowing what your cost of goods are and the cost of producing that calf at the end of the day, or whether it's going into the feed store and asking them to give you the crude protein of those different bags and sit with your calculator for 5 minutes and figure out which one you're going to buy. Inventory all of your ranch resources. Again, now when you see these trees growing up in your pasture, it's now a feed ingredient. So kind of think outside the box and think too about using your entire ranch. I have some ranchers with 5,000 acres, and they only can graze about 3,000 of it just due to water, fencing, and other things. So if they're trying to calculate how many cattle they need and they use 5,000 acres as their baseline, then they're going to be overstocking because really those cattle only have access to about almost a half of that ranch. Work towards eliminating the need for supplementation. Stop substituting your rangeland forages if you want sustainable net profit like we talked about. mix your own feed, work with other folks to make it work, and go outside and really utilize your extension specialists and your county agents. USDA guys can help out, NRCS. And just remember that successful people make decisions fast and rarely change them. So, you know, when it starts to get to be a drought, you've got to make some decisions. If you don't make them fast enough, then it can really hurt you that next season or especially the next year. So we went through a lot of information. I'm glad it's going to be recorded, although I don't want to rewatch it and hear myself. But if y'all have questions, that first slide has my email, and you're welcome. That's probably the easiest way to get with me, and I can call you back. But if y'all have any questions, then I'm open to answering.
We did have one question in the chat box from Roger. Is there any data from other states on feeding hemp biomass meal for supplementation?
You said hemp?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm not too, I don't know much about hemp. I haven't kept up with what's going on the past year, but so I'm not sure I can answer that question. Does I think
anyone else have any other questions?
The best way is probably, if you're going to search for that online, is just look at the universities that may be involved in that type of research, and then contact that faculty member directly. I personally don't have any colleagues at the moment that are researching hemp.
Okay, thank you, sir, Mr. Whitney. My name's Roger. The reason why I was asking that is because that's where we're going into the hemp industry, and so we just wanted to find out if you had encountered any experience from the other states. But we'll look into it and contact those universities.
Sure, and I'll look too. So if you want to email me your contact information, I'll do a little searching and can send you some information.
Absolutely, yes, sir. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
We also had someone ask if they could get a copy of the PowerPoint and Excel spreadsheet. We do have everyone's email address, so if Travis is able to share that with me, I can email it to you.
Sure.
All right, does anyone else have any other questions?
And again, if you come up with other questions over the next day or so, feel free to email me, and we'll try to get them answered for you.
All right, well, thank you so much, Travis. It's a lot of great information. Again, we will record this, or we have it recorded, and we'll post this on our YouTube channel. Give us a little bit to edit it and get that up, but also subscribe to our email newsletter. Whenever we get this posted, we'll share that video and information there. But if you haven't already, you can go back to those post-survey questions that we talked about earlier, and I will share my screen so you guys can see. But once you click the next button, you should get the post-survey questions. So if you could, just for a few minutes, answer those post-survey questions for us, and once you push the arrow button at the bottom, it will submit them. If you have any other questions, we will be on here for a few more minutes. Thank you all for joining us. If you need to, you can contact us at any time. I'll put my contact information in the chat box as well.
Thank you.
No problem.
All right, well, thanks everyone for joining us again. If you have any questions, again, I posted my contact information in the chat box, and we can also get you in touch with Travis. If you Google Travis Whitney extension, AgriLife extension, you can find his contact information too. But if you would like a copy of the PowerPoint or that spreadsheet he was discussing, please just shoot me an email and we can get that over to you. Thank you all for joining us and hope you have a great day.